All right. All right. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I am your host, Dr. Jed Applerouth, and we have a really quick little poll. It'll take about 2 seconds to fill out. Are you a parent, a student, an educator? And then if you have a kiddo, what grade is your child in? Getting a sense of where you are, just click that, and then that'll clear out. Appreciate that. The room is still filling in. I see the number is still rising. We're gonna let everyone come on in. Once I see a plateau, then we'll begin the presentation tonight. We're gonna have a recording of this, as we do with all our webinars, and we're gonna send you a link. So if you want to watch certain parts again, if you want to share it with a spouse or your students or a friend, that's easy to do that. And at the end, we will have time, I guarantee, for questions and answers. I'm hoping to answer a lot of your questions during the deck, but we will definitely have time at the end if there are unanswered questions. All right, I think we're hitting a plateau. So let me begin tonight's, and here we go. All right, so, oh, pardon that. First off, we do 3 things at Applerouth. We do academic tutoring, calculus, physics, history, English, test preparation, which is tonight's focus. And my favorite thing we do is executive functioning coaching, where we help kids just get better at academics in general, more organized, more strategic, better at help seeking. And we do all these things, but tonight's focus is going to be test preparation. So let's begin. We're talking about the changes that are coming, and we'll start off with a brief comparison that structurally, the SAT, it has totally changed. As of March of last year, there is no more paper SAT. That's now a thing of the past. I actually spoke with a representative, one of the key people at the College Board. I was in LA 2 weeks ago at this national conference, and she said, yeah, the paper version, they offer it for very, very few people as an accommodation, but they're really trying to just kill paper entirely. So getting a paper combination is extremely hard. Essentially, it's all digital, period, paragraph. The structure of the SAT, you have 2 verbal sections. Verbals that combine reading and writing, and skews more towards reading. Writing has been chopped a little bit. And then we have a little 10-minute break, and then you have 2 math sections. And we'll talk about that each section, the first 2 sections, the first reading and the first math, are a baseline. And then it calculates your score and it sends you to an easier or harder section. Well, that's called adaptive testing. And the ACT, as it is currently formulated, you have 4 standalone sections, the same you've had since 1959, no changes there. Reading, English, math, and science. And then you have a break, and some students get a short little experimental section. And this test is about 30 or 41 minutes longer. And, you know, that's one key difference. Now, the test that's coming in April, to the April ACT, it's going to be a new formulation. They essentially are kicking science to the curb and making it optional. We're going to have reading, English, and math, shortened versions of those 3 sections. And then some students will take science, some students will not. Now, this is only going to be available via a computer right now for the April test, the June test, the July test, the September test. Then in September of, a year from now, in 11 months, this formulation is going to go into paper format. So students who are able to find a seat in April for a digital test can try the short one, but most students will not be able to. They're going to have a real constraint in terms of availability. While the SAT, students can bring their own device, as they have, like for the PSAT, they can bring their own tablet, they can bring their own Chromebook, they can bring their Mac, and all you have to do is download the Bluebook app before. When it comes to the ACT, they are currently relying upon the schools themselves to provide the computer infrastructure to the kids, which is really a bottleneck and really a problem. And we're still waiting to see if they fix that and let students bring their own devices, which is the only smart move here. But they haven't announced that yet. But hopefully they're working on a digital fix that'll really open up the pipelines. Because right now, I have some slides later on, but I think availability is going to be very, very tight on this new test coming in April. All right, so let's dive in more. And we have a lot more slides. I'll cover much more of this in deeper detail. So the digital SAT is a computer adaptive test. Now, when you hear adaptive, some folks think, oh, every item adapts and responds. And that's item adaptive. That's the way the GMAT is. But that's not what this is. This is called a section adaptive test. It's like the GRE, where I get a baseline test and they'll score me instantly and then send me to an easier one or a harder one. So everyone gets a similar baseline, and then you're either going to go to an easy or a hard test beyond that, both for verbal and for math. So it's called section adaptive. The new digital ACT coming is not like this at all. It's linear. Some person, they called it a paper ACT under glass, essentially. So it's just going to be the paper, and it's not going to be different in any way. It's just, that's one key distinction. Now, there is a difference that you have a lot more time currently on the SAT compared to the ACT. And that's been a real chief complaint about the ACT, is that it's so much faster. You don't have nearly the time. Like on the current formulation, the SAT, you have 70% increase in the amount of time per question on verbal and 59% more time per question on math, which is tremendous. So you have these really big differences on how fast you have to be. You have to be much faster on the ACT. However, the core ACT that's coming, they bring it closer. They narrow that gap. So from 70, you go down to, you go to 43% more time per question on math for the SAT and 36% more time per question on verbal. So that's really a big difference, because remember, the time difference was verbal was 70% and math was about 60, but now that really is a meaningful change. So we're going to have less speed on the future ACT, digitally in April and then paper in September. That's good for kids. And the number of items, if you compare the current ACT to the digital ACT, they've made the SAT much more efficient. And one of the things is they're able to ask fewer questions, because with the adaptive module, they realize if you miss more than a third of the questions on the baseline module, they're going to kick you into an easier module. And you're not going to see a bunch of hard questions, which you probably wouldn't have got right anyways. And conversely, if you do really, really well on the baseline module and you get more than 2/3 correct, they're going to throw you into a harder module. And you're not going to see most of those easier questions, which are going to appear on the lower level adaptive module. So that's one of the reasons they can eliminate a bunch of items which really weren't that functionally useful, because kids who are doing really, really well, they're gonna crush all these super easy items. Why even give them? And so with this new, and the same thing, kids who are missing a bunch on the early stuff are not going to get the super hard questions right without random guessing, typically. So here is one thing. There are currently 98 items on this digital SAT compared to a current 215 items on the present ACT. That is a big difference. So you see the efficiency gained with this adaptive module piece. However, what we have on the upcoming SAT, the upcoming ACT digitally in April and paper in September, is they're cutting it down by making science optional at the end. The core ACT will consist of only 131 questions, which is, again, down from 215, which is a tremendous change. And so that is a very big difference that we're looking at here. And the same thing with verbal. It goes from having 54 questions on the current SAT to a reduced 86 questions on the forthcoming shortened core ACT. All right. Now, other comparisons, they're similar mathematically, but there is more algebra and advanced math on the SAT. The SAT is heavily skewed towards Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. The ACT there's still a lot of it, but not nearly as much. You have twice as much geometry and trig on the ACT, half as much on the SAT. And then they both have stats analysis, a little bit of, like looking at points and on a graph and charting and, correlations, a little bit more on the ACT. But one of the big takeaways is more geometry, ACT, more algebra, SAT. That's the slide there. And additionally, the ACT currently has a lot more advanced math concepts. They go into things you never see on the SAT. You don't see matrix multiplication. You don't see advanced ellipses and parabolas, hyperbolas. They don't go into domains and ranges of functions, radians, some trigonometry. So there's just higher level math on the ACT, as there has been for years. The SAT, one of the big changes they made is that everything is a short form little passage, typically under 150 words. And sometimes it's like 5 sentences, and then they ask you a question, whether it's a verbal question, about writing, about grammar, syntax, logic, or is it about the reading comprehension. They have introduced some comparison passages that I did see on some of the newer tests, but still they're both pretty short. You never again have these long form 700-word passages, which require a lot more memorization of reading. Whereas comparatively, the ACT does have big long form passages on reading. You have 10 questions a piece on these, 4 big reading blocks. And then you have, 5 big reading blocks for English, for grammar and writing. So that's one distinction. You have short little one-hitters on the SAT, and you have longer form passages on the ACT. Okay, and the structure, I think we've kind of covered most of this. In this slide, for every section, there are 2 questions that are experimental that don't count towards your score. What that means is they're testing those questions for future assessments to make sure there's no bias and also to gauge the level of difficulty. So they build a test with the right number of easy, medium, and hard questions. And so there are 8 questions of the 98 that don't count at all. They are, experimental for future tests. So adaptive testing, I figure by now you understand the distinction, and I'll go deeper into it. One thing kids do not know if they advanced into the easy or hard section. They don't tell you, and they don't even tell you on the answer sheet. They never tell you that. The only way you know is if you score above a 660, if you score a 690 or a 700, you went to the hard module. You also know if you score below a 440, you went to the easy module. Because if I do well enough to advance the hard module, I've locked in 440 points, which I can't go away. But if I score in that 450 to 650 range, I could have gone either into the hard module and done very poorly, or I could have gone into the easy module and done very well. But if you want to max out and top out, then you're going to go to the hard module, which opens up scores beyond 660. So people trying to game the system, if I miss a certain number and then I crush the easy section, that's not going to help you because you're going to be capped at a 660. All right, the administration is on the Blue Book app. If you're curious what the test looks like, you go to Blue Book app, just Google it, College Board Blue Book, and you download it to your computer, to your Mac, or to your desktop. And you can practice. They have currently 6 practice SATs. They're full length that you can take today. And it's the exact same thing they will test on. So the format of the practice is the exact same format as the official tests. So there's no mystery. Here's what it is, and this is the real thing. When you're going to take an actual test, you're going to download the test onto your device. It's going to be encrypted. And until you go in there and get the code the day of the test, it's just locked. And then they give you the code at the test center. You plug it in, and then boom, you're off to the races. And then you actually don't need Wi-Fi at all until the very, very, very end of the test. And then everything's happening on your own device. So you can be the Wi-Fi can go down, doesn't matter. At the very, very end, you need to send your scores off to the College Board. So you need Wi-Fi for like 10 seconds, boom, send it up, that's it. So, that's a good solution, for that piece there. All right, there's the digital testing, the Blue Book application, and there are a number of tools embedded if you want to play with that. It's a timer that kids can turn on and off. At 5 minutes, it will blink. There's a reference sheet of the top formulas for the SAT. You can annotate, you can highlight and write little notes. You can use the answer eliminator and cross things off. You can mask the answers, and you can also magnify if you need to expand something. And that's pretty handy. Also, the proctor is able to actually monitor the progress of all the students in the class they have a tablet which shows them everyone's progress in the class. They can see what page you're on, what number you're on, and so forth. If a kid seems stuck, they can actually walk over and say, everything's okay, and so forth. You are also allowed to have a calculator. There is a built-in calculator called Desmos, which is very, very valuable. You also are going to have scratch paper. You can ask for more if you need it. And if you have accommodations, they're baked in. It's when I enter my code and my name and stuff, boom, it opens up. If I have time and a half, it's there. Extra breaks, it's there. If I have text to speech, it's there. All these extra things are built in to the application. Now, a little bit about these sections. The verbal section goes in a very predictable order. You always go in this phase. So you have, 24 questions or so. And you start off with several questions of craft and structure. That's words and context, which is vocabulary. Then you move on to information and ideas, evidence, looking for evidence inferences about the author's intention, in other words. Then you go to grammar, and you shift to standard English conventions, form, structure, and sense. And then finally, you have these expression of ideas asking you about transitions, and they ask you to, they give you some bullet points and ask you some questions about these bulleted little lists. Pretty basic. And again, each one of those sections goes from easy to hard, easy to hard, easy to hard. It's like a wave, essentially, within those 4 sections. So it doesn't go from easy to hard over the course of the test, but there's a little mini easy to hard, then info IDs, conventions, easy to hard, and so forth. All right, you have this great little tool to track where you are. At the very bottom of the test, you hover over this review thing and it pops up. You've answered these. This one you flagged for review. This one you omitted. And so you always know exactly where you are on the test. And if it tells you blinks, you have 5 minutes left, you open this up and see what you haven't answered or what you flagged, go back to it. You can just bounce around by clicking on the, number 4, boom, you're at 4, 10, boom, you're at 10, versus trying to flip through the pages. I think this is a really cool feature. And here's an example of what the Blue Book is. And if you're curious, you download the app, this is what it is. Grafting is a technique in which tissues from different plants are joined. The joining called scions, rootstocks, blank traits from different cultivars. And then this is just a conventions one, you plug it in. Is it allows or allowing? Just read it in context. Very simple, very quick, half a minute, and on to the next one. I think there's a question. Let me see what that is. And I'll have time for questions at the end. And this is about super scoring, and we'll talk about that. But yes, super scoring should take place across paper and digital. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So the math section does go from easy to hard. You have 22 math questions, and it's a steady rise from easy to hard. And you have your calculator baked in and Scratch and your own little calculator if you want to use it. And if I hover over and click on calculator, boom, it launches Desmos, which I'll show you what that is. And if I click on the reference section, boom, it pulls up my main formulas, Pythagorean theorem, the area of a circle, the diameter of a circle. These things are baked in. And so let me show you what this looks like. Oh, and also there's a lot less reading on the digital SAT compared to the one that we had before March of last year. You have far fewer word problems and a lot more pure math. So 7/10 of the questions are pure math. About a third are in context. Okay, so they got rid of a lot of the reading comprehension. And Desmos, your kids have to learn Desmos. If you want to optimize your score, I've had some kids go in there and not touch it, but I'm like, you're missing out. You are leaving out, it makes your life easier. And Desmos is this. It's a calculator that about half the kids in the US already use for their physics, for their calculus, for their chemistry. It is a scientific calculator that's licensed by schools all over, in districts all over, in states all over the country. So they have a slimmed down version of Desmos. You don't need all the scientific functions, but it had the basic, you have your exponents, you have your basic functions right there, and you plug things in. And so, and it's really wonderful for graphing. Like here's an example. If you have this system of equations, they ask you what's the value of y. I could solve for y, I could multiply and simplify and so forth. Or I go in Desmos and just type in 6x plus 10y equals 60, 9x minus 5y equals 30. And I'm trying to find the value of y. I plug it in and I'm looking for my point. Okay, so the x value is up to 3, the y value is 5. So my answer is 5. Very simple. And so Desmos will save you time, full stop. Also, here's some quad formula. This is formula. Here, fx, y equals 2x squared plus x minus 21. The function has zeros at a and b. What's the distance between a and b? So the whole thing is, where are my zeros? Where do I cross? Where do I land on the 0 point of the y-axis? So I could solve it and do distance, or I look at my 2 zeros on this equation, this parabola, and I do, okay, I'm at -3.5 and over to 3. So my distance is 6.5. Boom. You skip all the math. So Desmos is your friend, and students have to practice it, and they will get better, and they will have higher scores. All right. So I mentioned to you that there's a key difference in the modules. There's an easy module and a hard module, and they look different. So here's your baseline. This is from test 1, which I should probably do the analysis for test 4, 5, or 6, which I need to do that, note to self. But here's what test 1 is like in the Blue Book. Level 1 questions, very, very easy. There are 2 of them. Level 2 questions, there are 10. These are the mid-levels. Level 3 questions, the hard mid-levels, is 7. And then the hardest ones, level 4, you have 3. So you're looking at 17 questions of 22 are in the middle. That's your baseline. But there's a small sample of easy and a small sample of hard. If I get more than a third wrong, boom, I'm knocked down to the easy. And in the easy, things shift over left. Level 1 goes from 2 to 7. Level 2 is at 9. My level 3 is dropped from 7 down to 5. My level 4 is dropped from 3 down to 1. If, however, I get more than 2/3 right on the baseline module, I go here on the Blue Book test 1, and it looks very different. Again, my level 1s, I don't have 7 of them, I have 1 of them. My level 2s, I don't have 9, I have 4 of them, but my level 3s go from 5 up to 12, and my level 4s go from 1 up to 5. So you see these look and feel different. And there is something also, this is to explain why there's much less detail on these score reports. That on the digital SAT, different items have different weights. It's totally different. Forever and ever and ever since 1926, almost 100 years ago, every item counted 1 point. Hardest question, 1 point, easiest 1 point. But now they actually can score it after the test is taken. They look and examine how many kids got this one right. Different items have very different weights. So one question could count more than twice as much as another one. And that's why scoring is very different, and they're much more opaque with scoring. They also, one of the beauties of digital testing is they can make slight tweaks. And so the test I have, the test my neighbor has, will be a little bit different. It could be within the range of, my math number 1 is your math number 6. The answer I have is B. For you, the same question, the answer is going to be C. And they can even do some templating. They haven't done this yet, but they could do a thing where, for me, I have a 3, 4, 5 triangle, and you have a 6, 8, 10 triangle. So my answer is 3 pi, and for you, it's 6 pi. Very basic stuff. But there are slight changes in the order and in the answer choices to make it hard to go and tell your friend the answer 1 is B, 2 is C. That doesn't work anymore, which makes these tests much more secure. The way you prep, there are 6 Blue Book tests, and you must practice them. You must practice with Desmos, and make sure you're doing things with timing and learning how to use these things. Now, score feedback looks like this. Forever and a day, I joined this industry in 2001, and until last year, the score feedback was fabulous. You got every single item, what you missed, what you answered. I could track back and understand patterns and trends. All they give you is this from now on. So you lose detail. One of the beauties is, Applerouth, we've developed 4 of our own practice tests, and we give you complete detail. We can explain to you what you missed, why you missed it, what category it was in, and we just have a lot more richness in our feedback. Accommodations are baked in. They're very easy, and they're automatic once you sign in with your code. One thing we learned is that the March test last year was actually harder, and so we tell parents that the first 3 Blue Book tests, the math is too easy. We've been seeing the test in March, and then May, and then June, and then August. We've seen now like 5 tests, and essentially math is harder. The Blue Book tests 4, 5, and 6 demonstrate this, but Blue Book tests 1, 2, and 3 were a little bit easy. There are harder math questions and more of them on the actual test. So be careful if you're looking at test 1, 2, and 3 to calibrate, am I ready for the new test? Because those are too easy. All right, now let's shift gears to the ACT. It is offering a digital test. It's right now, kids can take a non-adaptive full form test on a computer at certain schools, but almost no one's doing this. The availability is extremely low. But the nice short test comes out in April. And I think demand is going to be huge for that. And I think it's going to be a real bottleneck. So here are the changes. The current ACT, again, 75 questions in English going to 50. Math is dropping 15 questions. Reading is cutting 4 questions. Science is staying the same, but they're giving kids more time everywhere. So the number of questions goes from 215 down to 171. That's very nifty. And also the time per question. You're getting 17% more time on English, 11 on math, 27 on reading, and 29 on science. So that is a nice increase for getting almost a minute per question on the new test, the core ACT. Science, you can opt in or opt out. If you want science, take it. If you don't. But we still don't know yet how schools are going to respond. People haven't come out with full positions. They haven't even seen the test yet. So some STEM kids, engineering kids may want to take science. They're going to score it out of 36, but it's going to be a standalone section. It's not going to be part of the average. The new average for the ACT will just be your English, your writing, and your math. And that's your score. And then it'll tell you, I got a 31 on the ACT, the core, and then I also got a 33 on science, which is optional. And we'll see what happens with colleges and that test. There are going to be experimental sections, questions embedded into the each section. So before there was an optional, there was an experimental section at the end, but now they're baked in. So of the 50 English items, 10 of them are experimental, 40 of them are going to be functional, they're going to count. Of the 45 math, 4 of them are experimental. Of the reading, you have 9 experimental, and of the science, 6 are experimental. That's, interesting. And now they also have announced there are some proposed content changes, which might change between now and April, but we expect this to be the case, that the length of the ACT passages will vary some, and they're going to have some shorter form passages, not the big blocks, there'll be some shorter ones in there. They also intend to have an argumentative essay with questions tied to argumentation as part of the English, which will be different. Math, they're dropping the answer choices from 5 to 4 to match the SAT. They're going to be knocking down some of the more advanced topics, matrix multiplication, some of the advanced trigonometry, fewer questions in context, so fewer word problems, more pure math, and fewer questions and integrating key skills categories. It's one of the categories. They're knocking those down. Reading, they are also going to vary the length of the reading passages, some shorter. That's new. They're going to have more questions integrating knowledge and ideas. And they're also going to be bringing in more authentic, diverse perspectives. So we might see, more diversity of authorship. Science, they're going to have at least one passage on engineering and design. And lastly, more of the items are going to require outside scientific knowledge. So that's, it's more science, less reading comprehension. We'll see how that works out. Typically, you've had about, 6, 7 questions require some outside knowledge of the 40, and they say that number's gonna pop. So we don't know, is that 10, is it 12? But you're gonna have some foundational knowledge about science. All right, there are gonna be 4 options for the ACT, starting digitally in April and then on paper in September. You have the core ACT alone, English, reading, math, you're done. 2 hours, 5 minutes, you're finished. Then you have all that plus science. Then you have the option to add writing or to have science and writing. The writing is typically for kids who are in states where it's a requirement. Some of the states, they require every kid for graduation to take an ACT with writing, and it's a way they measure how well their kids are doing. But colleges don't care. For some kids internationally, it's a way to get a level of the writing skills of kids. But for domestic kids, when the SAT killed their essay, the essay became almost worthless, unless you're in a state that requires it as an end of course test, because there's a federal requirement for every student succeeds where they have to do a test in before 8th grade and then a test in high school. And some states use either the ST or the ACT as their high school test. And the core ACT is going to be discounted in price. We know we're going from a long test to a shorter test, shorter administration, less proctoring time. There's going to be a price break. We don't know how much, knock off $10, whatever it is. And now here's the rollout. So April, digital only, and they have to have their own computer test centers at the sites. In September, we're going paper and international. So we're going to have everyone on this new shortened version, and science is not part of the composite. Science is optional. And then in spring of next year, of 2026, you're going to have school, district, and state tests all shifting to the new short form. That's when the long form is probably going to be discontinued. We'll see. Yeah, actually, it will be discontinued. So there are some questions. Can I register? Not yet. We think registration is going to open in December for the April test. And I went online today and I was curious how far I need to go. And in Georgia, I live in Atlanta, and I queried for December, 2 months out, how far would I have to travel to take a digital test? Non-adaptive, and there's not much demand for this. And all there was available, the nearest one to me is 23 miles away in Jonesboro, then 28 miles in Cumming, 30 miles in Covington, Gainesville, Carrollton, Forsyth. So on average, I have to travel 31 miles right now when demand is nothing to find a digital ACT. So compare that to, I typed in December, the non-digital, the paper-based ACT. I can go 2 miles to Lakeside High School. I can go to Decatur High, that's 3 miles away. Jackson High in Atlanta, 7 miles, 8 miles. On average, I have to travel 8 miles to the first 10 places. So giving you a sense before demand even exists, how scarce the digital options are, because we're making the schools provide the computers and the seats, and that's supply is going to vastly underwhelm demand. Demand is going to just be huge. That's my sense. So you probably won't be able to get the short test for most of you until September. That's my insight. Although some lucky few will, and we'll see. And if they open it up to bring your own device, oh yeah, the bottleneck is broken and the floodgates open. But until then, it's going to be kind of hard. All right. When will they release new materials? They plan to amend the prep guide. And then they promised that we're going to have a full-length practice in early, probably January. Get kids ready for that April test. All right. Paper testing seems like it's going to eventually be retired. Jenna Godwin, CEO of ACT, she said, we let the market drive the decision, including the retention of paper and pencil. Here's the big quote: as soon as demand goes away, we are going to get rid of digital test. I'm sorry, get rid of paper entirely. So paper, and I think they may start using incentives to drive people towards the digital test, because paper is actually a security problem. If anyone opens up the stack of booklets and leaks it and takes a picture and puts it back in, then that test is compromised. Several years ago, they canceled a whole, a national, it was a test date because the test leaked. And all over internationally, the ACT has forced everybody to a digital test since 2019. And so we've had 5 years now of digital ACTs. No one takes a paper ACT internationally because of all the cheating, because there were massive, massive scandals in 2016, 2018. All the kids in Hong Kong and Egypt and Singapore, they all had their tests canceled. Because again, one bad actor being paid some money pulls the test out, photocopies it, camera, and then puts it back in. So paper is a problem, and eventually it goes away, which is better for everybody. All right, there are questions. BYOD, bring your own device. We'll find out. Are they going to kill paper altogether in September of next year? We'll find out. Concordance shouldn't be a problem. Well, dropping science puts more weight on verbal, because now you have an English and a writing section and one math. That's kind of like the SAT has been. Will that matter to colleges? How are they going to accept the changes? And will that make the ACT more competitive? I think it definitely will. The structure, the schedule of the year, you have 7 ACTs, 7 SATs, plenty of options during the school year. Ideally, I like taking the test 3 times. So either get a baseline first, and now it's a bit confusing for a little bit because you have a baseline, a paper. You have the digital SAT. That's your only option. Then you have, for the next 11 months, you have a paper ACT that's longer, faster. Then you have maybe the option of taking a shorter digital version if you can have a seat. But my thing is, don't bank on it, because unless I see a lot more seats opening up, capacity is going to be constrained. But ideally, once you choose your test, take it 3 times. In your testing plan, we have plenty of kids who are 1 and done. My nephew up in DC, he was 2 and done. And I was very, very happy with that. But in the grand scheme, have a 3rd test in your testing plan. My nephew had a backup in December, but won't be taking it. He's done, and I was very happy with that. It's the beauty of having been a founder of a test company, good tutors. He's very helpful. So structuring, scheduling, you can take these tests throughout the year. Some kids do, prep over the summer, but typically you can do group classes starting now for tests in the late fall, early winter. And there are many different, methods and plans. You can test in the spring, you can test in the summer. There's no one way to do this. Super scoring, there was a question earlier. Super scoring is they take your best section score from different testing administrations and combine them. So this kiddo took March, 670 was the math score in March. In May actually wasn't a strong test for this kid, but then June, this kid peaked in verbal at a 660. So the super score combines the March math and the verbal from June, and that becomes a 660 plus 670 is 1330, even though that kid never scored that high on any one single test. So that's super scoring. And the question was, are they going to super score across tests? And the answer is everything we've seen is yes, that they're not going to penalize kids who had paper and digital for the SAT. And we expect that won't happen either for the ACT, that they're going to super score across digital and paper. There was one, I think Princeton came out and said we're not going to do it. But again, that's one school out of 2,500 four-year schools. I think typically they're going to go along with this and not penalize kids. All right, we have completed, just announced last week, we made our 4th full digital SAT. They're great. And again, the feedback is very rich and very, very useful. And you get your first practice for Applerouth for free. And if you're part of our company, we'll give you all 4 of these practice tests if you need to help you get ready. All right. Again, we do 4 things: academic work, test preparation, EF coaching. And if you need help in any of those areas, we are very, very happy to help you. All right. Now let me pivot, and I'm going to shift to question and answer. I know there are 4 questions. I'm going to open them up, and here we go. So super scoring, I believe the answer is yes, for both the SAT and for the ACT. How will the old test with science section be compared against the new test without the science by colleges? And that is something we do not know. We don't know, but here's something also. There is no science on the SAT, and they've accepted that for 90 some years. And so science was the standout. It was different, a differentiator. But the SAT, they had English, they had reading, they had math. So the ACT is essentially going that direction. And the science also was never really a pure science. Like in Atlanta, Georgia Tech, never, for years, they didn't even look at science because it's not really a pure science. If they want a science, measuring your ability with science, they'll look at your AP chemistry, AP physics. They're going to look at other things. It really is more of a reading comprehension test with a little bit of math sprinkled in. And 7 questions of very basic scientific knowledge about experimental design, what's a dependent variable, independent variable, what's sampling error, or if there is measurement error, how would that affect things? Could I extrapolate? It's not really, biology or chemistry or physics. It really is the foundations of a scientific method. Okay, and I have a tiny bit about like what's meiosis or mitosis or what's inheritance, but very few questions. Are the 6 Blue Book tests similar to the 6 released paper tests for the SAT? Yes, they are. Those essentially are the same tests. So they're not different. So if you've gone through the 6 tests in the Blue Book, that's what we have right now. Then Applerouth has their own tests, but yeah, that's what we have. Why is ACT going digital and a paper and long-term maybe back to digital? Well, so it's been paper since 1959. They opened up digital. They forced everyone internationally to digital in 2019, and they opened up the option. They've been doing pre-testing on digital since like 2015, 16 with small districts and states. But they have given kids the option to take a digital test, but there's no advantage. It's not shorter, it's not faster, it's not any better. And so most kids don't take the digital test right now. Starting in April, there is a compelling reason for the first time ever to take it, because on the core ACT, it's both fewer items, they're lopping off 44 questions, and you have more time per question, and the test is shorter. So it's like, oh my gosh, why would I not take this test, which gives me more time, fewer questions? I mean, it's simply, and it's only 2 hours and 5 minutes versus, the full scale thing. So now there's a compelling reason but it's not going to be available to every kid. So it'll be available to a small number of kids who can get in. Then comes September. In September, that's when they're shifting the paper test to the short form. and the digital is going to be around. So they'll have two options, but over time, they want to phase out paper because paper is a security risk. Paper is problematic. And the nice thing about the digital test, the ACT has about 50 test forms, which they rotate until they retire them on the question and answer, the test information release TIR happens 3 times a year. And on those times, they retire a test. But until then, they can just keep reusing them. And the beautiful thing is, when they're pushing a digital test, they can push test form 35H to this school. They can push test, 17B to this school, one to this state, they can have different tests going across the country, and it makes cheating really, really hard. Because with paper, there's always been the issue of the zip codes and time zones, rather. So if I have a friend taking it in LA, and we're both taking the same test form, I can go and memorize the answer is C, D, E, and then go and text my friend who's taking it 3 hours later. And then boom, he has the answers if I can go in the bathroom during the break. But now with digital, we can all have different tests, and I can't send them the answers. It's like only for this test form, but they don't know. So very, very helpful. But I do think in the end, all assessments are digital. Same with the LSAT and the GRE and the GMAT and the DAT. And they're paper testing is just a thing in the past. Scantrons, that was developed by IBM in the 30s. It's time we move past Scantrons. And there are all kinds of problems with scanning and error. You're getting off on your gridding, and you didn't bubble well enough. Digital testing, it's like voting with paper versus the dimple chads or whatever it is. Having a computerized system is simply more less error prone by its nature. We live in Atlanta. Does the state of Georgia require the SAT or the ACT? So if you are applying to Georgia College and State University in Milledgeville, you're applying to UGA or Tech, yes. And after next year, that requirement will expand to Kennesaw State, to Georgia State University. That's where I got my doctorate, and 2 other schools in Valdosta State University. So it's going to be at 8 schools in the Georgia system. So yeah, we're going back. Georgia's going back test required. Tennessee is, Florida is, University of Texas, so test required is really growing in strength. We saw a flurry of them go back. Last year, it was the big selective schools, Yale and Brown and Harvard and Stanford and Caltech and MIT. And, and there are more tests. There are more coming. So if you're currently a junior, I guarantee, Johns Hopkins jumped in the mix 4 weeks ago. So you're definitely going to have more schools who are test required. I think, starting in the spring, they're going to be announcing, even after this cycle of admissions. I wouldn't be surprised if UNC Chapel Hill and, maybe some of the schools in Alabama, maybe schools in the Carolinas. We'll see what happens, but I'm expecting to see more schools being test required. Okay. All right. What are other questions? We have some time here. It's 8:43, and I will stay until your questions are exhausted. What haven't I answered for you guys? It can be beyond testing. I know some other things too, after several decades here. All right. Should you plan to take both the SAT and the ACT? In my experience, it's important that you figure out which test is better for your kid, which is why I believe firmly in taking a dual baseline. A PSAT, that works. A practice ACT, an official one, totally fine. But I want to have a baseline SAT and a baseline ACT and then choose. And Applerouth can help you with both of those if you want, or use ones offered by your school. But make sure it's proctored appropriately with the right timing to make sure it's a valid score. But yeah, but after you have got your baseline, then you choose a path. There's no reason to prep and work hard for both the ST and the ACT. Colleges don't need to see both. If you submit one, that's a good enough score in their range, you're fine, in my experience. Okay, well, 8:45. I think maybe that's it, guys. Oh, here we go. Do you know which test is required in Georgia for kids headed toward the science field? Both are equally accepted. STEM, you can take the ST and go to MIT and Caltech and everywhere else, all the engineering programs. You don't need, and again, the science section really isn't that much science. It's really more reading and a little bit of math with a smattering of science. If you want to showcase your engineering, your science chops, do well on BC Calculus, do well on the other APs or, IBs for science. But these tests don't, what they want to see, the reason MIT and Caltech brought it back, they want that math score, because that math score helps them predict who will do well as an engineer, as a physicist, as a, math major, comp sci major. So make sure your math score is strong, but they don't care if you take the ST or the ACT, not a thing. What were the general comments? Remember, 10-5 SAT test takers. The general comments. You know what? I would need to query my team to find out if there was something anomalous about October. I haven't heard anything about that, easier or harder or so forth. And there is some variation for sure from test to test. Sometimes math's harder, math's easier. There's no pattern year to year, but definitely the test does fluctuate difficulty level, which is why you take it more than once. Are digital SATs much harder than paper-based? No, I wouldn't say that. I'd say the difficulty level is comparable. They're just shorter, but that's part of the beauty of being routed to the easier, harder modules. And so they count for that difference. Will there be a copy of the recording? Yes, we're going to have a copy and we'll send you a link. Please feel free to watch it and share it. And please share it. We like spreading good information. For the digital SAT, is there anything to know, any prior English knowledge beyond the grammar rules? No. The conventions, it's, there are some foundational questions like in reading. They're going to ask you some questions, about tone, and they may throw a poetry thing at you and so forth. But it's not like an AP English or AP Lit, AP Language. It really, they're going to give you some reading comprehension. They'll give you some verbal, some grammar questions, words and context, vocabulary, comma usage, parallel structure. But really, if you know your grammar and you can read at a 10th, 11th grade level, you're going to be fine. All right, do colleges look at these tests equally? Is a 36 on the ACT equivalent to a 1600? Doesn't the SAT score fluctuate more? It's not an average, it's a sum of all the questions. Is there more variance, more fluctuation among the SAT? I'm not sure if there's more variance. They look at there's a bell curve for both tests. And they have these concordance tables. So they know exactly what a 36 concords to, a 1580 plus. They know what 31 concords to, a 1310. They have those ranges. So they really don't care which one. The question is, do you have the score within our range? Here's our middle 50 percentile. Are you within that range? Are you above that range? That's what matters. It doesn't matter which test you take. And in certain states, the states pay for everyone to take an SAT or an ACT. There are 26 states, I believe, who have a contract with either the ST or the ACT. So it's from some states, like in Illinois, they're just getting a lot more ACTs. From from New York State, they're getting more SATs. So they don't judge, they don't penalize kids for where they're from. Can you explain the percentile that you see in the detailed test score? The schools look at the percentile. Well, they know from their own class what they accept. And so it doesn't matter so much that this is a 78 percentile. What they care about is in their freshman class, they know typically they want to see a 1280 to and above, or something, they want to see like their low range is a 1310. So they talk in that language versus this kid got a 74th percentile. Admissions officers don't talk in terms of percentiles, but they do talk in terms of those are meaningful to concord the SAT and the ACT, but otherwise that's not as helpful. They really care about, do you have the score we want? Here's the scores we want. Are you in that range? That's what matters more than the percentile. Okay. Okay. Well, I think I've exhausted the questions. So, all right, y'all. There will be future webinars. We're going to learn more about the ACT. I'll be talking about other topics as well. Please feel free to reach out if we can help you in any way. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And there's one final question. Does it matter what grade? Yes, the grade level, I think these tests belong as a junior. When you finish sophomore year, that's great. We do have a small percentile, 5% of kids who are very, very advanced sophomores who take it their spring of sophomore year. As long as you finish Algebra 2, you're an advanced reader, reading at 11th grade level. In that case, you can take it at the end of sophomore year. Otherwise, wait till you finish sophomore year and you're a junior. Summer before your junior is great. But yeah, I don't like kids taking them as freshmen. Because again, the math is through Algebra 2. And then the reading level of the SAT is an 11th grade reading level. And on the ACT, currently it's a little bit lower. It's around the 9th grade reading level. But ideally, you want to be up to snuff. And if you are in Algebra 2 as a junior, do not take these tests until the spring semester. So wait until February for the ACT or wait until March for the SAT. So that was a good question. All right, y'all, I think that is it. Everyone have a good night and look forward to helping you if you can. And again, look out for future webinars and please sign up for our newsletter. Good information for all of you about this process. All right, y'all, have a good night. Bye-bye.